Welcome to those that have joined and to those who may come in later. This broadcast is in reference to 23 days of terror and those who live or currently live in the DMV, which is the District, Maryland, and Virginia, still, I'm sure, have memories of the DC snipers, also known as the BELTWAY snipers. One being John Muhammad and the other Lee Boyd Malvo. Now, many of you may remember those horrible days in the DMV. I remember I was at work when we first started hearing of the story. And there are a couple of talking points I would like to get to. One is profiling. And in law enforcement, profiling, as we all know, or most should know, is a very helpful tool. However, the tool of profiling can go very wrong. And in this particular case, it most certainly did, in that who they looked for were Caucasian men and a white box truck vehicle. Every bolo, be on the lookout, was for white men, possibly military, in a white box truck. Well, as we see in this next slide, this is not a white box truck. This is actually the vehicle used in the deaths and injuries to those victims of John Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo. Now, for those of you who may have joined from Facebook and or YouTube, as each broadcast, I'm trying to become more interactive. If you all remember this particular case, the DC sniper, and I can't imagine at this juncture many not remembering this case, please press a 1 or a yes or a thumbs up that you remember this. And if possible, where you were when you first heard of this case. Again, for those joining and those who may come in later, I would like to be interactive, and I'm not asking you to come up, but as I think about it, I will drop the link if there's anyone who would like to share anything in reference to this. because one of the victims, actually someone I knew. So let me go ahead and put that in the chat. In the event someone would like to share. All right, the link is there. And I'll place the photo again. Again, these are the DC snipers. John Muhammad to your right, and Lee Boyd Malvo to your left. And I will wait for a few moments to see if anyone remembers this case and to let me know in the comments where you were during this horrific 23 days. I'll give you all a few moments and then we'll continue on. Okay. Again, this is a vehicle in which these horrific crimes took place. But as I mentioned, the original profile was for a white box truck. So let's go back a little bit in history over the DC sniper, or what many have come to know as the Beltway sniper case. And again, welcome to those who have come in from Facebook and or YouTube. The link is there if you have anything you would like to add or share. I'm going to start with the end and work my way backward. On October 24th, 2002, the FBI closed the case on the DC snipers, and as I mentioned, what many has come to know as the Beltway snipers. And it was closed off on the side of the Beltway near a rest stop in a 1990 dark, as you can see, bluish gray Chevy Caprice. Now, 23 days of terror, which is in my title, may not be the most accurate description, but for those, again, who reside in the DMV, which is the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia, every day, upon first hearing of the news that there were snipers in the area, in several different areas, it was mayhem. People afraid to put fuel in their car, go to the mall, grocery stores. Also, and most importantly, because a young boy who attended Benjamin Tasker Middle School in Bowie, Maryland, had also become a victim, but he did survive. Now, during that month, 10 people, 10, had been randomly gunned down. No consideration or thoughts as to race, gender, or age, as we see in this matrix on this next slide of those victims. May they continue to rest in peace. I'm going to pause for a moment of silence and remembrance of these victims. And as I mentioned, I actually knew one of them, and he is on the bottom right-hand corner, Conrad Johnson, a Metro bus driver who was ready for his shift to Montgomery County, Maryland. So again, a moment of silence as we remember those lost. the horrific DC sniper or Beltway sniper killings. Thank you. Now, these murders, the murders that shocked, horrified not only the DMV, but the nation as a whole, because it was broadcast on every media outlet, began in the nation's capital. So it was once first thought on October 2nd, 2002. Again, October the 2nd, 2002. The first victim was a 55-year-old man who was struck down in Wheaton, Maryland. He was in a parking lot. Wheaton, Maryland. Do you know how close that is to me? And sometimes when I think back to these events and go through certain areas, I still get an eerie feeling. Even though John Muhammad, formerly known as John Williams, but once he converted to Islam, he changed his name to John Muhammad. 10 o'clock the next morning, the morning after October the 2nd, the next victim, just a few miles from the first, was also murdered. Shortly thereafter, these two murders were sought and put together as being directly related. And subsequently, a multi-agency investigation was launched to find the perpetrators of these heinous crimes. Now, everyone should remember the man in charge, the man we actually saw shed tears after these snipers. John Muhammad actually mocked the then head of the Montgomery County Police Department, Chief Charles Moose. And for those who do not recall Chief Moose, I'll place a photo of him on this next slide. Chief Moose was dedicated to this case. He was very passionate, and he tried and attempted to communicate with these evil monsters. And we'll speak a little bit about Lee Malvo shortly, because that's the basis of this story. And a quick brief note on this is that just recently, the higher courts are trying to determine if the sentencing should be reconsidered due to the age of Lee Malvo at the time of these killings. Chief Moose, with the FBI's assistance and several other law enforcement agencies, teamed up together by Chief Moose's request in hopes to find the serial killers who went on this rampage again for 23 days in the DMV. One of the most shocking murders was an FBI intelligence agent, analyst Linda Franklin, who was killed by one bullet when she left this store, which many may remember. I know I do, because it was across every news station. And this happened in Virginia. Again, FBI intelligence analyst Linda Franklin. She was just leaving this Home Depot in Virginia with her husband when she was gunned down. So again, a brief summary: these snipers did not discriminate. There was no connection, no concern with the gender, with the race, nor ages of their victims, as each of them were random. The FBI had placed an 800 number to collect tips and information and any statements from those who may have seen or heard anything that may have brought them closer to finding those responsible for these killings. And while hundreds of tips came in daily, 24/7, they were still no closer. They employed experts, behavioral analysts, to help profile who could be responsible for such acts. And again, as I mentioned, the profile led to the belief, due to the type of killing and rounds that were found, and subsequently this weapon here had to be connected with someone possibly in the military. Now, as the investigation went deep and they delved in further, they learned that John Muhammad was involved in the military. However, he hated the military, but was strongly trained. The weapons and artillery that was found in this vehicle and if you look towards the trunk area, that's where Lee Malvo would be positioned as John Muhammad, 24 years his senior. And keep that in mind, because that may be one of the reasons the higher courts in Maryland are playing with the reconsideration of the sentencing of Lee Boyd Malvo. Now, many of you may know or remember John Muhammad was executed in 2009, but Lee Boyd Malvo was sentenced to consecutive life sentences. So again, if you look towards the middle of the trunk area, Lee Boyd Malvo would be positioned in the back seat, and when they were to reach a random target, Lee Boyd Malvo would be outside from the back seat with his weapon, with the camouflage that nobody would have known until this vehicle was actually seized. And the crime scene investigators learned this is how the targets unfortunately met their demise. From this little space right there in the trunk area. And again, I remind everyone, the profile was Caucasian men in a white box truck, because that is what one of the tips had provided. So again, as I've mentioned in plenty of lives and comments, what may appear to be textbook isn't often the case. And this profile, unfortunately, that had many law enforcement officers looking for a white box truck. Can you imagine, or do you imagine, the many white box trucks that travel up and down 295, 495, 270, 70, all the highways in Maryland, over the Woodrow Wilson Bridge in Virginia, and all of the other highways in Northern Virginia. So you had hundreds of law enforcement agents, not only from this region, but others who came in to assist, looking for a box truck, and Caucasian men. And as they were looking for this non-existent vehicle, and men, shooting sprees continued. Now this case turned to a cat and mouse game around October the 17th, when a call came in from a man claiming to be the sniper, John Muhammad, which we now know indeed was John Muhammad, who not only teased, if you would, but antagonized law enforcement, but honed in on Montgomery County Police Chief Charles Moose. Where he said he was responsible for the murder of 2 women. One, and this is the interesting part, was actually in Montgomery, Alabama, which was a month earlier, which meant she was killed in September of 2002. And upon further investigation, they learned a woman was killed, as this anonymous caller, which we learned was indeed John Muhammad, was accurate. Now I'm going to go over a brief timeline for those of you who remember and those of you who may be new to these 23 days of murder in the DMV. And remember, John Muhammad was linked to the murder of a woman with whom he offered the information in September of 2002 in Montgomery, Alabama. October 2nd, as I mentioned earlier, a man was gunned down in the parking lot in Wheaton, Maryland. October 3rd, which is probably one of the worst days. There were five murders, 4 in Maryland, and then 1 in DC. And again, I remind you that all of these murders were random But in the sick mind of John Muhammad, the true target was his wife. Fortunately, he never was able to get to her, but she knew when she heard of all of these killings that John Muhammad, formerly known as John Williams, prior to him converting to Islam, was on his way to Maryland to find her and to kill her. But in his travels, and with him meeting with Lee Malvo, who was a troubled teen who sought love and attention and affection and nurturing from his own mother, but did not receive it, nor the acceptance, found that love and nurturing from, again, John Muhammad, who was 24 years his senior. October the 4th, one woman was wounded while leaving Spotsylvania Mall. And Spotsylvania, for those who may not be familiar, is in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Again, Spotsylvania Mall in Fredericksburg, Virginia. October the 7th. October the 7th is when we actually saw, or many of us did, Charles Moose shed tears, because this was the day when a young boy at Benjamin Tasker Middle School became a victim. And this was to taunt then Chief Charles Moose of the Montgomery County Police. Now, these two have been in contact, and Chief Moose was afraid and did not want this to spill out, especially to children. And after the contact, the very next day, which was October the 7th, the 13-year-old was shot while attending school in Bowie, Maryland. Again, this was at Benjamin Tasker Middle School. Now, he survived, but again, I can't begin to imagine how that may have affected him psychologically. October the 9th, while pumping gas in Manassas, Virginia, another man, a random individual, was murdered. October the 11th, while in Fredericksburg, not too far from the Spotsylvania Mall, another man was shot dead. Then, on October 14th, which increased those seeking to find these serial killers, was the death of FBI analyst Linda Franklin, who again, along with her husband, went into a Home Depot an FBI intelligence analyst shot dead as she was leaving the Home Depot. October the 19th, a man was wounded outside of a steakhouse in Ashland, Virginia. And again, the matrix of the victims, and on the bottom right-hand corner, Conrad Johnson, the last victim who I actually knew, was killed prior to the beginning of his shift as a Metro bus officer in Aspen Hill. Just a few, I would want to say, yards maybe from what was called Wheaton Mall at the time, but it's now Westfield Shopping Center. So again, rest in peace to all of these victims. And as you could see, they were all from different races, genders, ages, and occupations. October 24th, 2002, John Muhammad and Lee Malvo were arrested due to a tip. In this vehicle. John Muhammad and Lee Malvo were convicted at trial, of course, and pled guilty in multiple court cases in Maryland and Virginia. Both were sentenced to life without parole. However, Muhammad received the death penalty, and he was executed on November 10th, 2009. Again, John Muhammad, to your right, received the death penalty in Virginia. And if anyone knows anything about the Commonwealth, they absolutely do not play. And he was executed again, November the 10th, 2009. Now, let's look at the evidence that was found in this 1990 Chevy Caprice. And remember, the profile was alleged to be Caucasian men with a possible military background and a white box truck. What was found in the vehicle, as I mentioned earlier, and if you blow the photo up, you could probably see a better idea or get a better idea. But inside the car, right as I said, at the trunk area, there was a hole cut right before the area, the end of the trunk by the license plate. The shots were fired. Other items found: a Bushmaster .223 caliber rifle that had been, according to forensic experts, used in every attack. Again, a Bushmaster .223 caliber rifle. The scope of the rifle and a tripod. The owner's manual of the Chevy Caprice with written impressions of demand notes. Also found was a digital voice recorder used by both Muhammad and Lee Malvo to make extortion demands. A laptop, a stolen laptop from one of the victims that contained the map and shooting site, and also, most notably, the getaway routes and some of the crime scene. A series of maps, walkie-talkies, and other items. As I mentioned again, the initial profile for John Muhammad and Lee Malvo was thought to be Caucasian men, one with a possible military background. Now, as I mentioned, John Muhammad, formerly known as John Williams, who changed his name to Muhammad after converting to Islam, did have prior military experience and training, especially in weaponry. And his goal: travel to Maryland. And this was his target: his wife. After hundreds and hundreds of tips, and here again is a rifle that I spoke of. Bushmaster 223 rifle, which was used, as reports stated, in every murder. Through a hole cut in the back of the trunk area, just above the license pad in the rear. So on October 24th, approximately 11:45, they decided to take a nap at a rest stop, as I mentioned, right off of Interstate 70. Someone noticed this vehicle and found it odd. This vehicle also had a New Jersey license plate. And after law enforcement was contacted, this vehicle was surrounded by SWAT and other members. And it was there. The 23 days of murder, 23 days of horror in the DMV ended with the arrest of John Muhammad and Lee Malvo. And here's a map that depicts the areas in which the shootings occurred. Falls Church, Manassas, and Maryland. One woman killed October the 14th, Manassas. One man killed October the 9th. One man killed October the 3rd. One woman injured October 4th. One man killed October the 11th. One boy injured October the 7th. 5 people killed between October 2nd and the 3rd. Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Fredericksburg, also known to many as Spotsylvania. Can hear the victims. This is Lee Malvo today. In Annapolis, Maryland's highest court heard arguments on whether DC sniper, one of them, which is Lee Malvo, who was convicted and given 6 life sentences should be reconsidered. And I'm going to place that in my poll. And those of you that are watching or may see the replay, I would like for you to put in the comment section your thoughts. Do you feel as though Lee Boyd Malvo parole sentencing should be reconsidered? And this is because of a 2012 Supreme Court decision that barred mandatory life sentences for juveniles. And at that time, Lee Boyd Malvo was a juvenile. And many people think, and these are just theories, that he was brainwashed by one who showed him the love and the nurturing he did not receive and what he did seek. And remember, John Muhammad was 24 years Lee Boyd Malvo's senior. So Malvo looked up to him. Kyron Iyer, a Maryland public defender, argued that life without parole for Malvo, who again, as I mentioned, was 17 years old at the time. In the shootings that terrorized everyone in the DMV, and I can say personally, I was super afraid each and every time I went to pump gas. And it didn't matter the area because no arrests had been made. The profiles were so inaccurate and there was just fear everywhere. I want to say it was almost ghost town. People would get out to do what they needed to, but for the most part, people were in and they were not near windows. So it felt like we were almost on a lockdown. At least that's how I felt. But again, the question is, should Lee Boyd Malvo, who was 17 at the time, have his parole sentencing reconsidered due to the 2012 Supreme Court decision that barred mandatory life sentences for juveniles? The Maryland public defender, again, Kyron Iyer, stated that his client could benefit from Maryland's new law, which enables prisoners convicted as juveniles to seek release once they've served at least 20 years. And I'll repeat that. The new law states that prisoners convicted as juveniles to seek release once they've served at least 20 years. Iyer argued and contended that it was clear that the judge found Malvo was capable of change. And I believe that's critical that the judge found Malvo was capable of change, which is significant under the changes in this law. And I quote, "The bottom line with the sentencing with Malvo is the corrigibility was undisputed. It had no legal significance in 2006. It has legal significance now, and it means his sentences are excessive." Kerry Williams, an assistant attorney general for the state of Maryland, noted that Malvo is incarcerated in Virginia, which is also significant, and would have first needed to be paroled from that state, which again, the state of Virginia and the Commonwealth is no joke. And he is serving four life sentences for 3 murders and 1 attempted murder. So again, that is a brief overview of the DC sniper case, also known. Thank you for that thumbs up from Facebook. If you have any comments, and if you are aware of this horrific 23 days back in October of 2002, and for anyone, Facebook and or YouTube, please be sure to leave a comment, because I do read them and I will respond. If you believe that the parole of Lee Boyd Malvo, who was one of the DC snipers and responsible for murders and injuries as well, should be reconsidered due to the 2002 U.S. Supreme Court decision that barred mandatory life sentences for those who were convicted as juveniles. And as we know, Lee Boyd Malvo was, for all intents and purposes, a juvenile at the time of these murders. And his mentor, John Muhammad, who many feel as though brainwashed Malvo in these horrible crimes, who also was sentenced to death in Virginia and was executed in 2009. It will be interesting to see if this reconsideration does take place. And again, my question is, do you feel as though, because the judge feels as though Malvo is capable of change, should his sentences be reconsidered due to the fact that he was a juvenile at the time of these murders, and because of the new court ruling which, as I mentioned, stated that there is a legal significance because his sentences were excessive at that time, where he was 17. And for those who missed the new law in Maryland, but remember, Malvo is serving these sentences in Virginia, so he would have to complete those first, according to these laws. But in Maryland, the new law is that prisoners convicted as juveniles to seek release once they've served at least 20 years. John Muhammad Lee Malvo. Location of the death of an FBI intelligence agent in Virginia. Former Montgomery County Chief of Police Charles Moose. The intended target, the wife of the late John Muhammad, because he was executed in 2009. The map, the infamous map and timeline of the shootings and injuries. And remember, I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, Muhammad stated that he had killed a woman in Montgomery, Alabama. The victims, all random, all races, all genders and ages. And Conrad Johnson, on the bottom right-hand corner, a Metro bus driver, just before his shift, Aspen Hill, and I actually knew this man. He was the last victim who lost his life. This is a vehicle that had the DMV frozen in fear for 23 days. And the weapon, a Bushmaster 223 rifle. Lee Malvo. For the question is, with this new law in Maryland that states juveniles should serve at least 20 years to be considered for parole. Malvo is currently serving life sentences in the state of Virginia, but the public defender is questioning, were these sentences excessive due to the fact that Malvo was a juvenile at that time? And again, my question, and you feel free to leave your comment or any thoughts. If you believe despite his age at the time. Or if you believe he was indeed manipulated due to his upbringing, which was very horrible, if he should be reconsidered. And if the sentencing, because he was 17, was excessive. And that's my presentation of the DC snipers and what many remember as the Beltway snipers. 23 days of horror in the DMV. Thank you for those who joined. Thank you for my Facebook family and for those on YouTube. Please be sure to like, comment, and share if you enjoyed this video and any others that I post. Thank you. Be safe, be well, and always be healthier. Bye-bye for now.